With us today is Mr. Ralph Menetre. Ralph grew up in St. Tammany, but he was a teacher, an administrator, a supervisor, and assistant superintendent in St. Tammany Parish. I first met Ralph when he came out to Folsom Elementary when I was teaching kindergarten, and he was a supervisor. The next time I saw him was a couple of months later at the Covington Educational Center, and he not only recognized me, but he called me by name. And I was very impressed. So I know with a memory like that, we're going to have lots of good stories to hear today. So
I hope so.
I know we will. So why don't you start just by telling us, since you grew up in St. Tammany, what was it like to grow up here?
One thing you forgot in your little talk to begin with, I was a coach also at one period of time there.
See, I didn't know that.
Well, Covington, where I was born and raised here, born in 1928. Delightful place. It's still a delightful place, but so many changes have taken place, as y'all know, in the school system with the tremendous number of people we have there. I was born one block from the present administrative building, and so I had to walk to school every day. Didn't have to go in the snow or anything else, but I had to walk to school that one block every day, and I walked back home every day to have my lunch. At that time, we did not have a cafeteria or did not have a lunch program as such. Shortly after I was born, though, we experienced, or I didn't experience that much being so young, but we entered into the Depression. And I lived through the Depression years, and at that time they did establish a lunchroom program at the old building where you are now, and they took some chicken wire and things and made a part of the basement into a lunchroom. And the children that couldn't afford it, a nickel for getting soup and a piece of bread or something of that sort, we called it the soup kitchen. And that existed for a number of years during the Depression. Funny how children are, we were so interested sometimes. We wanted to go to the lunchroom, and at times would try to swap with to get the lunchroom ticket from one of the children and give them our lunch that we brought to school that day. So that was an interesting thing at that particular time. That was I started the elementary school there in 1934. I have pictures of that first grade picture, which include myself, my wife, Superintendent Sip Shane was with us, Hank Ferrer, Shirley Shane, who was Sip's wife. A number of our people that were actually in the school system were in that first grade class.
You must have had a great first grade teacher.
We did. Miss Viola Gallagher, wonderful person. One of the things, I guess, that I don't know how it would go in the school systems today, but she put us in, we had 5 rows, A, B, C, D, F. And you could fluctuate from row to row depending on how well you were doing in school. And, well, we enjoyed it because we had a group of students with us that were achievers. And so we were always trying to make our way up to at least the A row, and possibly the B also.
So you had long A and B rows, right?
Yeah, they were. We tried to have. We'd have to put extra. We'd take desks away from the F row, put them with the A's. You see, to keep us going. But that's the way she ran the class. But very good teacher. During my elementary school, I was fortunate to have excellent teachers. In the 4th grade, I had a lady by the name of Myra Badusky, and I also had her in the 7th grade, and just a wonderful person. I can't say enough about her. In 5th grade, I had the Honorable Alfred Dubazon, who later became principal at Covington Elementary and retired from that position a number of years ago. In the 6th grade, I had Martha Overby. I don't know if you all are familiar with Martha, but she was a 6th grade teacher at Covington Elementary at that time, and later became a supervisor of school attendance in the system. And then, as I said, Miss Badusky in the 7th grade. And I think the last time I talked to anyone here, I think Melody was interviewing me, and I told her about Miss Badusky, who we loved. And at that time at Covington Elementary, we had both of the fire escapes that were still usable and kept in good shape. And all year in the 7th grade, we tried to talk her into coming down to shoot with us. We were on the 3rd floor, and we used it regularly for fire drills and things of that sort. And we'd use any excuse in the world to try and get her to let us go down the fire escape. We tried to talk to her all year about doing that, and finally the last week of school, we finally got her to agree to go down the fire escape. And we told her we'd wait for her down at the bottom and we'd catch her as she came out. And fortunately, unfortunately, let me say, we didn't notice the type of dress that she had on. It was a rather silky rayon, that real slick. And she got in that fire escape and she came down those 3 floors, and she just went out so fast we missed her completely, and she ended up bouncing on the ground for 2 or 3 feet. So we laughed about it later. She wasn't hurt, but it was very curious and thing.
Probably the last time she went down.
Probably the last time, but just a delightful person and a wonderful teacher.
And you went to high school at
what then was Lyon High School, which had been previously Covington High School. It had been renamed after Elmy Lyon, who was a superintendent. And then later on, I think around 1949, after I was out of school, out of high school that is, it became Covington High School again.
And then they named an elementary school Lyon.
Yeah, they made Elmy Lyon Elementary School over by the fairgrounds in that area, yes.
So tell us about Covington High.
Covington High, 1941 to 1945. Great experience. Again, I tried my best to excel in my schoolwork, as did a lot of my friends that were all very concerned about academics. But I also played basketball, I played football. In those days, we didn't have track and golf and soccer and all those good things, no baseball field or anything to use. So we had to concentrate on those two. I've shown you some copies of some of our old yearbooks, which are kind of laughable now when you look at them compared to what they come up with today. And same thing for some of our old football programs, some that were dedicated to 2 good friends of mine that lost their lives in World War II.
And then you went to LSU.
Went, fortunate enough to get a football scholarship to LSU.
And I think we have a picture of
you.
We
have a picture of that also. And went there in the summer of 1945. At that time, freshmen could play. They can play again now at this time, but started up there in the summer and worked out during the summer, and then went on there and spent my entire 4 years there at LSU and graduated there with a Bachelor's of Science and lettered at LSU while I was there. I spent more time on the bench than I did on the field, but I did get a chance to play enough to letter. But my whole educational experience was delightful. I couldn't have asked for any better.
Tell us what it was like when you started teaching here in St. Tammany, and what was the educational system like?
Well, starting to teach, I didn't, as I said, I have a Bachelor of Science. It was not in education. In fact, I was in the process of going back to get my master's degree in geology, and I couldn't get into school. I graduated at midterm, and I wasn't able to get in. So I came back, and one of the real pioneers of St. Tammany Parish School, now we're talking about education, the real pioneer in the school system was Henry Mayfield. And Henry recruited me. He wanted, it happened that there was a lady teaching the 5th grade at Covington Elementary. And she'd been in the WACs during the war, and this was right after the war was over. and she decided to go back into the service. So he offered me a job for the remainder of the school year. So I put in maybe 4 months teaching the 5th grade there. I enjoyed it so much that I decided I'd like to do it. And I talked to Mr. Mayfield, and he said, well, I'd have to go back and get certified. But without that, they went ahead and gave me a job for the next year, full-time job, doing the same thing, 5th grade at Covington Elementary. Then I proceeded to go ahead and get my certification and then started teaching. Interesting, I was telling you about my first check. Salaries, I don't know what salaries are now, but I understand they're a little better. And I got my first check, and I had the stub, and I forgot to bring it. But it was $167 for my first month that I taught.
For a month.
Yeah, for my first month. And we had I think what you consider a very conscientious group of teachers. I remember one thing particularly about comparing sizes. We had a teachers meeting, and when we'd have a teachers meeting, we could expect 75 to 85% of the teachers were going to show up. And they all could get into Folsom Elementary's gym.
Wow.
And that's where
that was the whole district?
That was the whole St. Tammany Parish.
Wow.
And they were all there for that meeting. I remember that specifically because I think that was probably the first teachers meeting that I attended in St. Tammany Parish. In the old gym there, at that time was Folsom Consolidated School. Mm-hmm. And I ended up teaching 5th grade for several years at Covington Elementary, and then they decided they'd try something different, and they needed an extra teacher, so they gave me a combination 5th and 6th grade, which was just a delightful experience. They gave me all, not all, but the top students at the 5th grade level and some of the top students at the 6th grade level, so they could learn from each other. But it was an interesting experience. We only had to do that for 1 year because of the needed additional teachers there. I remember specifically one of our, I'm trying to think, Dr. Morgan.
Randy Morgan.
Randy Morgan. Is he still in the school system?
He's still here.
Yeah,
Works
well,
in Central
he was
Office.
one of the 6th graders at that
Okay.
time. I remember that specifically related to the educational system. I finished teaching there in 1958, and I was offered a job as principal at Folsom Consolidated School, it was called at that time. We were 1 through 8. During my tenure, though, the people petitioned and had it extended to 1 through 9. They wanted their children to stay in the Folsom community an extra year, which was great. It was a fantastic area. I've never been in a place that was more supportive of their school system than was that of Folsom.
And it was still like that when I taught there.
I'm sure it
a
was.
wonderful
I don't think
community.
it was changed. I had an interesting year, one of the years that I was at Folsom, though. Again, the things that you had to do back in those days. I was principal. I taught. I had the first period free for administrative work. I taught the 8th and 9th grade the rest of the day. I coached both the boys and girls basketball team. I managed to make out all of the menus for the cooks. And I did all the buying. All they did was the cooking. I didn't have to cook.
Wow.
But it was
probably a good thing that that's not going on right now.
Yeah, it was a full year, but it was a very satisfying year. And after being at Folsom for 5 years, I applied for the job at Covington Junior High School and went there. Spent 4 years there, and from there on into the supervisory capacity at the central office, which I spent the rest of my school career in the central office at different.
And you handled a number of different things there. I know you were my boss for a while.
Yeah,
when you were in charge of Title
when I
I.
went in, I was director of federal programs. That was one title that they had with it. And I was also supervisor of secondary education. I spent more time at working with teachers at that level. I guess one of my biggest challenges, and it was just when we were beginning with our desegregation program, and I was given the assignment to work with the lawyers and with the judges and school board members in executing our coming up with a desegregation plan and then executing it. And thanks to just a tremendous cooperation by our school board, our administrators, our teachers, our children, and their parents, we got through desegregation with a limited amount of problems. People were very cooperative with it. And I think that helped us to keep a very strong educational program going through that very turbulent time in many places in the United States.
Well, St. Tammany's always been such a strong community, and remains that way.
I contribute that to the fact that we had a strong community, period. And then when I say community, I mean all of St. Tammany Parish.
Who were some of the other people in central office with you at the time you were there?
Well, when I went there, Mr. William Pitcher was superintendent. Mr. Mayfield was assistant superintendent. Sip Shane was in the office. Dick Clanton.
Was Mary Ellen
Miss
Armitage?
McLean was there. She was business manager. Mary Ellen. Miss McNeely, who was music supervisor. And shortly after I got there, Mr. Pitcher became very ill with cancer and passed away in sometime during 1967. And at that time, Mr. Sip Shane took over as superintendent for us.
What were some of the other pressing things and the big challenges that you had?
I guess some of the same things that I know that the school board is probably has faced before, is that we were just overrun with children when we started into back in the 70s with the space program, when it started gearing up, and they built the Space Center over in Mississippi, and they put in some facilities there in Slidell. And so many of the top people in that program, they didn't want them to live right near the center. They wanted them, and so we got many of those people in St. Tammany Parish and their children with them. So housing became a real problem. That's when we started the portable era. And the portable era has gone on up until, I don't know whether we're still in portables or not, but that was one of the things that I worked with very closely as a supervisor, or as assistant superintendent, excuse me, that I was kind of in charge of the maintenance department oversaw it. And we started building our own portables. We were buying so many of them. We finally made up our own plans for portables and started building them right on site. But housing was a real problem at that time.
So Mishu and the space program caused a boom in Slidell, and the opening of the causeway.
Causeway, yes, naturally. I forget about the causeway back in the 50s that started bringing people over it. And of course, it has just magnified that over the past few years, moving to the North Shore. Right. For a great place to live.
One of the things in St. Tammany Parish, Ralph, we like to support the people who have lived here. We have a lot of our teachers and principals who grew up in St. Tammany. What was it like for you to come back? You went to school here, you grew up here. What was it like to go back and teach in those schools where you had gone to school?
Well, it was interesting, Marian, that I never gave a thought to going back into teaching until I had that little void in my life between graduating and then going back to get a graduate master's degree. And I had, thankfully, Mr. Mayfield got me interested in it. And I just fell in love with teaching and working with children. And I thought back then about the wonderful experience that I had throughout my educational process. It was just a delightful time. I can't think of anything that was negative during my entire career as a student. And after I got into it, on a temporary basis, I enjoyed it so much, I said, I think this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to work with children, and maybe I can affect their lives as much as these people that I've mentioned earlier have affected my life and given me hopefully my good traits that I have, and I've tried to fashion myself after many of those people.
What were the class sizes like when you were in school and then when you taught school? Do you remember?
I don't remember exactly. I would say that when I was in school, I'm guessing somewhere 25 to 30. When I taught school at Covington Elementary, that combination 5th and 6th grade I talked to you about, I had 35 children. So, well, 20 of them were, about 22 of them were 5th graders, and about 13 of them were 6th graders. But it was nothing unusual during my teaching years to have in excess of 30 students in a class. So I know you all have come a long way in dealing with that. But it was just something that we accepted. That's the way it was, and we went ahead with the best job that we could possibly do.
I often had 30 in my classes when I started teaching, so yes, we have come a long way.
Yeah,
so.
my daughters both teach, and they always come back and they fussing about this, fussing about that, and then they tell me they've got 15 in their class, or 18. I said, you don't realize how blessed you are to deal with those few children.
Well, we certainly are thankful for Mr. Mayfield that he found you and brought you into our system.
What a fine man, and what a real foundation
Isabel Yarber used to talk about him
in our system.
So when did you become assistant superintendent?
Mr. Clanton retired, who was assistant superintendent at that time, and I applied for the job and was appointed assistant superintendent in 1984.
1984.
And I was administrative. I dealt with the administrative phase of it, and we also had a academic assistant superintendent that dealt with programs and curriculum.
Do you remember how many schools there were in St. Tammany when you went into central office, or when you started as a teacher or a principal? Do you remember? And then how many when you retired, by any chance?
I would say when I retired, and I'm only guesstimating this, I would say in the neighborhood of 40 when I retired in '86.
Okay. Any special memories that you have as being a part of the central office staff?
I think the main thing is the relationship that I've had with educators for my entire career, both as a student, as a co-worker, and the support I've received in any capacity that I've ever been in. It never was a real problem to do your work because you had the cooperation of the student body, the parents, the teachers, and your co-workers who in the administrative end of the teaching.
I know your daughter's been a teacher here in St. Tammany for many years, and so you've probably heard her talk about our guaranteed curriculum and everything's online. What was the curriculum like when you started teaching at Covington?
Well, basically, when I started at Covington Elementary, we basically had adopted series that we had for each grade level, and we also had teacher handbooks that went with those, and we tried to follow, if this was going to be the adopted text, we tried to move through that text so that if it was reading, we would have a lot of continuity going from the first grade right on through the, at that time, the 7th grade, which was still there at the elementary school. And then, you know, you have your own chance to innovate and do things as you work with children. But really and truly, the textbook and following those manuals, which I thought were very good. And we concentrated a great deal on the 3 R's. We did not have the vast expanse of curricula that they seem to have in the schools today, particularly at the elementary level. I taught only as high as algebra at the 9th grade, so I didn't really get into the high school level to a great extent. That 9th grade was at Folsom Consolidated when I was there, and I was teaching math there to them.
You want to tell us a little bit about some of the pictures that you brought? Share those with us?
Well, I'd be happy to. I have one here of my kindergarten class, and that was in 1933. And there were, let's see, there were 8 of us, and our teacher was Ms. Wiedemeyer. And we had a class in the old basement of the present administrative building. And I brought another picture here of our 1st grade at Covington Elementary. And this picture includes myself, Hank Ferrer, who was one of our fine principals for years here in the system, Sip Shane, who was our superintendent and did just a wonderful job. My wife is in the picture. Sip's wife, Shirley Warner, is also in this picture of the 1st grade.
Now, Sip was principal at Mandeville High.
Yes, he was before he became, he went in and he was director of federal programs to begin with. And when he moved into the, no, it wasn't him, but he eventually moved from that position into superintendency. Have a picture here of of our 5th grade. Some of the same people that I mentioned that are in the school system or have been in our school system are in this picture also. I see that this 5th grade is Mr. Alfred Dubazon. No, many people will recall Alfred, who was 5th grade teacher there for a number of years. Later went to Folsom Consolidated School as principal, and then to Covington Junior High School as principal, and then to Covington Elementary. And he retired as principal there at the Covington Elementary. After I finished elementary school, I have a picture of what was then Lyon High School. It was Lyon High from 1926 to 1945, and it was destroyed by fire in the 70s while we were actually building the new Covington High School that's out on Highway 190.
And this one was located
right where Pitcher Junior High School is today.
You had some football pictures of yourself, I think.
Well, yeah, let's see. Here's a picture of our starting 11 from 1944. And this is a group picture for 1943. I got one ahead of the other, but Hank is in that picture also, Hank and Troy, and I think Sip is in, oh no, Sip's not in that 2nd group there. Then I have a picture that when I was at high school, I didn't realize what a good-looking fellow I was at that time. Yeah. Then, as I said earlier, I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to play football at LSU.
You know, I see some differences in the uniforms, too, from today.
Oh, yeah.
From the kind of uniforms
you wouldn't believe those uniforms. And this is a picture they took as a freshman at LSU. And as far as pictures, if we still have time, this is a picture of the faculty at Folsom Consolidated School back in about 1958-59 when I went there as principal.
And I see Miss Evelyn Pittman in that picture. She'll be one we're going to interview.
Was teaching, I think, 3rd grade at that time. And I left Folsom, as I said, and went to Covington Junior High School. And I have a picture of that faculty that year. Let's see. Jack Salty, y'all recognize that name, I'm sure.
Yes, indeed.
And Bill Ferrer, he was on the faculty. Troy Jackson was on my faculty. Miss Audrey Alexis Y'all may remember her. And that's pretty much it. Maybe
Sounds like you had some real challenging people on that faculty.
Yeah. It was a good faculty.
I bet it was a lively faculty meeting.
Boy, was it.
With Bill Ferrer and some of that
Yeah.
group.
Yeah. So that was during my tenure at
Covington.
Covington Junior High School.
And then you had your yearbook.
Well, yeah, this is what we called the yearbook at that time, the Lion's Echo, and I think they've improved the whole presentation a great deal. And some of the things I did bring in. Oh yeah, this was one of the. I mentioned this when talking earlier. This is one of the football programs from the Ponchatoula Line High football game. This was dedicated to two of my friends who were killed in action. A fellow named Schroeder and another one named Kep.
Okay. And this is your letter that you...
That's my letter that I got at Line High School.
Line High School. For playing football and basketball for 4 years.
Right. And then I got a jacket, but I sent it on to the War Relief.
Well, these are wonderful. It's fun looking back and seeing all of the pictures from the earlier days and hearing more about your days here in St. Tammany Parish.
Well, thank you. I had fun looking up the pictures. They asked me to bring something, and I spent some time just looking back at some of the things that I do have. I'll have to get back, try and reorganize. They were pretty much scattered around. So.
Well, you'll have to see if you can find your pay stuff.
That's right. I need to find my pay stuff.
So, what advice, with your years of education and your wonderful experiences, what advice would you give to our new teachers who are starting this year and our new administrators starting in a new job to help them as they begin to shape their future in education?
I think if I had anything to say is that they have to love their job, they have to love the children, and they've got to be committed to doing the job and making the best possible citizens that we can have in this country, because we need a lot of them.
And I think that's wonderful advice, and certainly we can see how your influence has helped shape St. Tammany Parish and its future. And we thank you very much for coming to visit with us today
Thank you for
and sharing
having me.
your stories.
It's been a pleasure.